Those in favour, please say aye.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't really suggesting that you put the question because I thought one or two of my colleagues might want to take a call on the
I did try,
question.
Mr. Mallard.
And I'm just checking that my colleagues are in fact prepared to do that. And if that is the case, I'm very happy to defer to them.
I call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes people are unseemly in their haste. But thank you, Mr. Mallard. Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the Minister, and that is I agree that we need to update the forms of disclosure that are made when people have public offerings, be it debt, participatory or equity securities. And I agree that the old distinction that we had between investment statements and prospectuses was not working, that anyone who was knowledgeable would want to see the prospectus rather than the investment statement. I also believe that prospectuses had become so long and unwieldy, listing all manner of risks in a way that was confusing for investors, because when faced with a question as to whether they should invest and they had this long list of risks, it was so long it was hard to discern which were the important risks and which were the less significant risks. So I'm pleased that we're updating the form of disclosures that are to be made, but I want the Minister to assure me that we're not going to be replacing these two documents, one of which was too brief and imprecise, and the other which was too long and overly detailed, with a document that strikes the balance in the middle. Mr. Speaker, I was in the practice of law for a long time and used to do quite a bit of prospectus work. Yeah, I did practice enough so that occasionally I did something right. Thanks, Ruth. I started doing work for, way back when, prospectuses for what was then the Otago Savings Bank, or Trust Bank Otago, and did prospectus work for a number of other public companies and also a number of public issuers. I was lucky enough to work with people who had been in the practice, doing this sort of practice even longer, and they showed me the original offer documents for Radio Otago, which my firm had acted in and the people that I worked with had been promoters of. The original offer documents in respect of Radio Otago could be read by a layperson or an expert. They properly described the nature of the investment, which was an ordinary capital raising. They were open as to the inability to make accurate financial projections because it was a new venture, therefore it was a bit of a punt. They informed people that it was a bit of a punt and you could lose your investment, but you couldn't be liable for anything more. And at the end of reading those documents, which could be prepared without the firms that were involved in preparation of those documents becoming what one of my subsequent business partners used to call non-risk-taking profit-sharing partners in capital raisings, because rules became so complex and expensive to comply with that the professionals made as much money out of it, or had to charge a lot to meet the compliance costs of what was being required. But in those old days, people had a fair understanding of what it was they were investing in. They had the opportunity to invest or not. The company was able to access public capital markets rather than being reliant on a smaller pool of investors being professional investors who met professional investment exemptions. And I think, overall, it was actually better back then. And I want to have some assurance that these rules here are going to fix the very real problem that we have in respect of ordinary capital raisings in New Zealand. I'm not talking about debt securities and finance companies masquerading as being safe when they're unsafe, but in respect of an ordinary capital raising, which is always risk capital, I want New Zealand small companies to grow into big companies, and I want those small companies, and we are a country of small companies, partly because we're a small population, I don't want to prevent the people in those businesses from accessing capital to grow. Now, at the moment, the first round of capital is themselves and their family. Second round is, the first round is themselves. Second round is often a mortgage over the house. Obviously limits to the amount of capital you can raise through that. The third layer of money for those small companies growing is often family members and friends. And again, we shouldn't be preventing that through securities law happening, but they do need to be able to expand beyond that. We know that the lenders to these companies, it's very hard to borrow money for those companies if you haven't got land-based securities. So they're not going to get the money from debt markets or from banks, and effectively they are reliant on ordinary capital raisings, and I think that they should be able to do that from the public rather than just from rich people, both for reasons of lowering their cost of capital, and also I think everyone should have the opportunity to invest in profitable ventures, not just wealthy people. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like the Minister to address that issue. I'd also like the Minister to address the issue as to whether we're dealing with the additional layers of risk and cost that we've created for directors, the certificates and risks, increasing legal risks that directors face if they become directors of issuer companies have become onerous. And that's becoming counterproductive because we want experienced directors to be willing to offer a hand to small companies that are trying to grow without them having to take too much personal liability, Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable.
Without them having to take on too much personal liability in the event that the company for which ordinary capital has been raised fails, because it does happen sometimes. And in respect of that, that's why we do have limited liability companies to protect directors from some of that risk if they're not acting inappropriately. And if we so load the duties on directors that they effectively become guarantors of ventures that go wrong, then we don't get good directors who are experienced, willing to lend a hand and help these small companies grow into big companies for our mutual prosperity. The third issue I would like the Minister to address is whether this fixes the problem of issuer audits being required post-issuing to members of the public at the moment because of a prior bill that this Parliament's passed in the last 5 years. If you are a public issuer, after you have been a public issuer, you have to have a special issuer audit of the company that assesses performance against prospectus in a way that increases audit costs. And again, that is an inhibition because it increases costs relative to other companies and therefore increases the effective cost of capital and makes it harder for small businesses to invest in. The last question I would like the Minister to answer is what we're doing and whether we address through this bill the very small capital raisings that are at the moment theoretically illegal through crowdsourced funding. Really interesting thing that started to happen through the internet, where small amounts of capital, actually sometimes not that small amounts of capital, because lots of people put in $50, and if 100,000 people put in $50, you've raised $5 million. So these small offerings that can be effected through the internet now, and it's called crowdsourced funding, they ought to be facilitated. And I have absolutely no problem, and I understand that this bill is meant to facilitate that, and I want an assurance that crowdsourced funding, I'd like to know what the limit is per person. I don't think there should be any limit of the total amount that's being raised. I would like to know what the limit is per person, and if there is any limit on the total, I would like to know, because I don't think it's appropriate. I think if we have an appropriate limit of, say, I don't know, a couple of $100 that people can take a punt on, if we let them waste that much money on lotto every weekend, why wouldn't we let them invest that through crowdsourced funding in something that could grow the prosperity of our company and bring the jobs and innovations that we need to prosper as an economy and to create job opportunities for the young people. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it at that, and I would like to hear from the Minister in respect to those issues.
Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't